Welcome to the Gruber Morning Show, our weekly EV podcast. I'm Pete Gruber.
Mark Schaffner, good morning and welcome.
Got an image here I'm going to pop up for you, and this one kind of made the headlines. It is a picture with a caption, Tesla getting to $5 trillion gross revenue.
That would make Tesla the most valuable company in the world if it did something like that.
That would be amazing. And there we go. And those are the two components, what is going to make this happen, they feel. We've got the robo-taxi, and then we have the robots are coming, the Optimus robots. And you had some very definite ideas about how this could possibly even come to fruition.
I definitely do. I took some time to look into what it would take to make the cyber taxi a meaningful component of a $5 trillion company. And we'll say within the next 5 years. It's not going to be easy, but it is going to be possible. Here are the things that I think are going to have to happen in order for the cyber taxi to succeed and become a meaningful part of Tesla's $5 trillion valuation. First, and FSD has to reach at least level 4 autonomy. Now, that is where the car drives itself in most conditions without human intervention, possibly in a defined area. Good news here, Waymo does this. San Francisco, Phoenix, I don't know if they have any other markets yet, but it's been achieved, so it's possible.
So we know the technology's there.
We know that it's possible. But without at least level 4 FSD, the entire economics of this concept fall apart. You can't have a person behind the wheel. These cars have to go by themselves. There would be massive deployment of the Tesla software network needed. Tesla needs to be able to get to the point where they can have at least 1 billion ride shares a year on their vehicles. And ride shares with individuals who own Teslas and are lending them to the company to use will be an important part of this.
Fascinating.
Cost per mile advantage. One of the more fascinating things you have to think about. In order to achieve the kinds of numbers that Tesla needs, over 1 billion ride shares per year, the company needs to have the right competition and be targeting the right competition. Tesla, I think, is. Most of the analysts are not. The analysts are asking about Uber and Lyft and taxis and Waymo, and Tesla says, no, that's not our competition. Our competition is car ownership. Just like in 2007, what the Apple iPod and Spotify a few years later did to the music industry, where it's no longer economical to actually own a CD. Tesla needs to do that for automobiles. They need to bring their cost per mile down to somewhere between 25 and 50 cents per mile in order to compete with people who right now own cars and pay 25 to 50 cents per mile to drive their cars down the road. If Tesla can do that and still obtain about 30% margin on their cars, they've got a chance. There's going to be regulatory approval hurdles. Tesla's going to have to be all over the world. It's going to have to be mainly in dense urban areas. And they've got a whole bunch of governments that they got to convince. And then, of course, massive fleet production. In order to get 1 billion rides a year, that's 1,000 rides a year per car for 1 million cars.
Okay.
That's 3 rides a day per car for 1 million cars. That means they probably a reasonable minimum is 1 million cyber taxis on the road. But these cyber taxis are going to be Tesla owned, not individually owned. So how do you take we'll say a $30,000 car times 1 million cars? That's $30 billion worth of assets that you have driving around on the road, costing you money. You're not going to see ROI for those assets probably for months, if not years. And that's a completely different model than you have right now, where you build a car, you sell the car, you get the money for the car within a few months.
Right.
And that says nothing about the infrastructure needed both to build these cars, the factories needed to build these cars that may or may not exist, and the service infrastructure needed to repair these cars, which we know from experience definitely does not exist.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some really significant challenges, but first and foremost, without full self-driving, nothing else even needs to be discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Tesla has to have that. At the same time, does Tesla have, say, $60 billion laying around that they can just pour into this with the hope that within 5 years they're getting enough return on their investment? The good news is that culturally, there is absolutely a shift away from driving.
Mm-hmm.
My generation, we love our cars. We love driving our cars. The generation behind me, kids all the time. The license isn't a status symbol anymore. They don't care. There are many kids that are my children's ages in their 20s who don't even have licenses. They prefer to take and spend the extra money for an Uber, a Lyft, or a taxi
Right.
because they can't drive.
DoorDash. They're more interested in their cell phones than they are their cars.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. So like you were saying, this is most likely going to be the biggest CapEx expenditure in the history of mankind.
Very likely it will be, outside of the kind of CapEx that a government entity would spend. You've got like the $500 billion infrastructure improvement plan that was passed by the federal government a few years ago. Outside of a massive social works infrastructure like that, you just don't have anything like that.
Sure. Got a bunch of comments coming in here. YouTube, Randolph Schneck, thanks for joining us. He says, hi all from Wyoming.
Good morning.
YouTube, Pradeep Verma says hi.
Hi.
Then YouTube, Mechanic Mike, hello. Now, is that our Mike over at Gruber Motor Company? It's entirely possible.
It's possible. Good morning.
Instagram, Neil Sony 2012. He says, hi from India. We love it when people come in from various parts of the planet. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then finally, YouTube, Randolph Schnack says, one thing that Robotaxi offers that almost no one else can is to be able to drive from one city to another.
That's an excellent point that Randolph makes. If this even gets to like 60 or 70% of its goals of fruition, the cyber taxi alone could spell $5 trillion in valuation for Tesla and up to trillions of dollars a year in revenue if they can meet even most of these goals.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating concepts. I have another image here I'm going to pop up. This is the impact of the Tesla supercharger. So here's an interesting graph. From 2012, when the Tesla Model S first came out, to 2024, if you take a look at that chart, it is it's a spike, definitely a spike. You know, the thing to remember here is, before 2012, the Roadster came out in 2008.
Right.
There was no such thing as public charging systems available. You couldn't go to a mall, a hotel, and take your Roadster and expect to get a charge.
Right.
So what people typically did was, there was a Roadster option, which was a collection of adapters. It was a bunch of NEMA-type outlets and sockets and cable assemblies that they sold. And if you were going to take a trip somewhere in your Tesla Roadster, you needed to go find a KOA campground. And they typically had 208 or 240 volt type boxes that you plugged your camper into. So that's what all of these proliferation of adapters was for, that you could actually take your Roadster and, the only charging method was at KOA campground. Now, I'm not sure where you slept, though. That was the only problem,
I don't know. That's a good question. One of these days we'll have to ask Raphael again.
Yes.
Because he's done, 2 trips around the world in a Roadster and at least a third one coming.
Right.
And I remember him talking about that to him, charging was the easiest thing in the world because he would just find a road that had a power line. And when the power line branched off, he'd go, and his charging adapters included direct access to the circuit board sometimes.
Right. He had to become an electrician in order to be able to figure out how that circuit breaker panel was wired and what kind of phases were available, what kind of voltages and all of that. But yeah, so there was usually about a 4-hour delay or charging, type episode with a charger, with a Tesla Roadster if you were on the road and you needed, and you had depleted your range.
Sure.
So yeah, the question becomes, and if any of you want to chime in, the Roadster owners, what did you do back in the day when all you had was KOA campgrounds and you took a trip? How did you occupy yourself for that 4 hours or so to get a full charge again? So it's just remarkable that here we are 12 years later, and we have 7,000 charging stations. And this is just Tesla, by the way. This isn't the other brands.
Absolutely. And I remember hearing as late as 2017 and 2018, people saying Tesla, they're just crazy. They are losing all kinds of money on their charging infrastructure, and B, they'll never make money on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, we were all waiting to, this was investment for Tesla. This was not funded. All of these charging locations. And the reason Tesla did it was they realized that they weren't going to be able to sell cars unless they had some sort of a fueling system for those cars.
Right.
And of course, those of us with vision recognize that, well, what happens when the EVs begin to take over? These charging stations are going to be very much in demand, and you could see that this could be a revenue generator for Tesla. Mm-hmm. So we've gone from 7 to 7,000 superchargers nationwide or worldwide, actually. And so I asked ChatGPT, I said, is the Tesla supercharger network profitable today? And here's what it came back with. He said, well, it was launched in 2012, and the network now generates substantial revenue and profit. In 2023, Tesla's supercharger network generated approximately $1.74 billion in revenue, accounting for about 17% of the company's services and other segment. By the third quarter of 2024, the network delivered 1.4 terawatt hours of electricity, suggesting now an annual revenue potential exceeding $2.5 billion. And looking ahead, analysts are predicting, Bloomberg especially, that by 2030, the supercharger could generate $7.4 billion in annual revenue and around $740 million in profit. Wedbush is a little bit more aggressive, and they're predicting annual revenues of $10 billion and $20 billion by the end of the decade. So part of this, of course, has been bolstered by Tesla's willingness to expand their supercharger network to the other electric vehicle brands. And the other electric vehicle brands are adopting the NACS Connect type connection, which of course helps because you certainly don't want to carry a bunch of adapters around with you like you had to do with the Roadster when the only thing you had was KOA campgrounds.
Well, I mean, it's when you look at the overall, in business school, we would call this the customer wallet. The automotive experience, total cost of ownership. You have money for the car, and then you have money for tires, and you have money for fuel is one of the big expenses. Mm-hmm. Tesla has captured that piece of the customer wallet now for all brands.
Right.
And so yes, it's absolutely, it was genius on Tesla's part. You and I, when we first started this podcast, though, we called it. We were talking about, will this ever be profitable? And we're both agreed, yes, this is a genius move.
And if you think about it, this is now akin to the new form of gas station.
Yeah, it is.
And how many of those are around the planet, you know?
It certainly is.
So brilliant move by Tesla to continue to invest in their charging system. Randolph Schnack in Wyoming, he says, in Wyoming, these cities are often hundreds of miles away.
Wyoming is a great example of the kind of rural area where it's hard for electrification to really take hold
Mm-hmm.
because of that exact type of thing. I grew up in the Northwest in northern Idaho, same type of thing. You might have little communities of anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred people in many cases. There is no good business case for a big supercharger station in communities like that.
Yeah.
This, if you get a good long-range robotaxi, it could solve a lot of those problems.
Instagram, Old Farmer Dude 1 says, hello from central Alberta, Canada. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Mechanic Mike mentions Minnesota.
So he's from Minnesota. He's not
Okay.
Mechanic Mike from here in Arizona.
Randolph Schnack, any idea how much Tesla's making on its charging stations? Well, the projected revenue was 1.74 billion in revenue in 2023, and in 2024 they're projecting 2.5 billion.
Yeah, and if the numbers were to hold true, 740 million in profit on 7.4 billion in revenue would mean that Tesla's getting about 10% net profit on their supercharging stations. Those are some pretty impressive numbers.
All right, looks like we've got more comments there.
Yeah, Randolph Schnack on YouTube also says, in Wyoming, you do still have to carry adapters, but you can usually find some brand of supercharger.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good news. That means that the EV Go network or the ChargePoint network or the Tesla network, one of the three, among others, is probably building out pretty well.
Yeah. So I've got another image to pop up here, and this one is a comparison between Tesla and BYD. And the article goes something like this. Tesla versus BYD, two EV giants, one global race. Now, they say Tesla may dominate in headlines with 795 billion market cap and cutting-edge tech like full self-driving, 4680 battery cells. But China's BYD is quietly winning the numbers game in a different lane. Despite a much smaller valuation, BYD generated more revenue than Tesla last year, and it's scaling fast with affordable EVs and powerful blade battery tech. With Tesla leading in innovation and global infrastructure, BYD is excelling in volume, affordability, and domestic market control. And the next decade of EV supremacy is up for grabs. So who's going to win our electric future, they say?
You remember, have you ever watched Back to the Future?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do you remember it's 1955 and Marty McFly is showing Doc Brown the DeLorean time machine.
Mm-hmm.
And Doc Brown looks in at the flux capacitor and he says, well, I can totally see the problem that you're having. This thing says made in Japan.
Right.
And Marty, with a kind of a confused look, goes back to Doc and says, but what do you mean, Doc? All the best stuff is made in Japan.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that was a shift. That was a great moment in the film to me. And it was a shift in perception. In 1955, Japan made all of the really cheap junk
Mm-hmm.
that had very low quality but had very low prices. When you fast forward about 40 years, in 1995, China took Japan's place.
Yeah.
They made all the cheap junk that didn't last, was low cost, but was also really low quality. Between that and today, I think the same kind of jump has already been made.
Yeah.
China now makes some of the better quality products in the marketplace, but here in the United States, in my opinion, tariffs and politics have gotten in the way, and most Americans do not realize the amount of quality product that come out of China today.
Yeah, good point. And I remember it clearly in the 60s. Made in Japan was a very negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
It was cheap. And then the Japanese, who, by the way, got some of our quality control standards and nailed it. There's a whole historical, episode about how that happened.
Yes.
But, in the audio world, Japan took over fairly rapidly. Kenwood, Nakamichi, Sony, some of these top audio brands, replacing Zenith and RCA and GE. That was then considered junk after a while.
Yes.
Even in the computer world, when I worked for digital equipment, we were making line printers. The the LA-180, for example, which was a floor-standing printer, dot matrix printer. Japan came along, Okidata,
Oh, yes.
with these little desktop printers, and they destroyed digital's floor-standing dot matrix printer market within a span of just a few years.
I remember the hotel that I worked in while I was in college had one of those floor standing printers sitting in the back office area, unplugged, with an Okidata printer stationed on top of it, because the Okidata was more reliable and much cheaper to operate.
Right.
And they had the Okidata running everything.
Yeah, but I think your analogy is very much on point, because the stigma that made in China has is rapidly disappearing. Some of the best intellectual talent is in China. Their educational standards are much better than ours today, and it's not a country that you can discount any longer.
No, you really can't. And with BYD being what I would think of as undervalued, especially for the revenue that they produce, it will be an interesting thing to see. One thing that we know from Tesla is that Elon Musk is very persistent, and he takes competition seriously.
I have another image to pop up here, by the way, guys. While we're on the topic of, is China beginning to outpace some of the other countries? This article says China paces ahead in electrification, while Europe and U.S. flatline. And they mention a number of categories. China dominates in clean tech production. Solar PV, for example, photovoltaics. Over 80% of solar PV manufacturing capacity is in China, with little or no change in that distribution expected. Batteries. China also dominates battery production. Now, we're not talking about flashlight batteries and, AA cells. We're talking about the EV batteries, the lithium products. They say that by the end of the decade, over 80% of the, back to batteries, all right? I'm jumping around here. It also dominates battery production, it says, through the EU and US are projected to increase their share by 2030, though the EU and US are prepared to. And then the final one is wind power that they mentioned. By the end of the decade, they say that China is expected to increase its market share, while others, like the EU, will shrink eventually. So, China definitely can't be discounted at this point in time.
I'll be interested to see, even 5 years from now, what's going to happen in terms of the pollution, things like pollution controls and the pollutants produced by different areas of the world and countries of the world. For a number of years, China was the biggest polluter on Earth.
Right.
The last that I had heard is the United States has retaken over that title because of all of these clean energy things that China's doing. And China's not doing the clean energy necessarily to be clean. They're doing the clean energy because it's more economical and simpler to take care of over the lifespan of the product than the older fossil fuel items. And they can control and do control much of the clean energy infrastructure worldwide. They cannot control oil. They're a massive importer of oil, and they don't like being beholden to outside interests.
Interesting. Okay. So they say that China is on track to become the world's first electro giant. And the categories are solar, wind, EVs, and let's not forget about high-speed rails. And of course, batteries. They say China is crushing it. With electrification hitting 30% versus the US and EU stuck at 22%, China could lock in a lead as the ultimate energy superpower.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. On YouTube, PYGKLB is here. He says hello from Oregon.
Welcome.
Here in Oregon, he says Tesla is filling the supercharger availability on the major highways, but charging can be problematic east of the Cascades.
Okay.
The Cascades, geographically, you've been through Oregon before?
No.
The Cascades, they're about between 50 and 75 miles inland, coming out almost to the coast. Most of the population center of Oregon is west of the Cascade Mountains.
Okay.
So Interstate 5 goes up through California, through Oregon, and on out. Where eastern Oregon is more high desert, and don't think of it like we have a Sonoran desert. It's a cold desert, high plains, low moisture, and very rural.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see why that's the case.
Interesting. YouTube Ghost Privacy says, hey, China lies. They fudge all their numbers. Well, all right.
I can't argue that one.
All right, so here's one that we've all been waiting for. Got an image for you here. And the headline on this one is, Elon Musk says he's getting back to business at X and Tesla. He says, I must be super focused. Well, of course, Musk has been working with Donald Trump and his administration to reduce the size of government.
Mm-hmm.
And we were all wondering, how involved is Elon in the running of his companies? And my take on it was he can't really be that involved because it's too big. You know, after a while, you have to begin to rely on your teams and your management and to run things. But it seems that the expectations are that he is not involved, and the stock has been affected by that. So it was a temporary stint, though, however. He did say that right from the beginning. He wanted to get the Doge effort fully in place and underway. And the reports coming from that activity are very encouraging. I mean, the things that they're finding. So he said that going forward, and he originally announced this at one of the last Tesla earnings calls. He says, I'll continue to spend a day or two per week on government matters for as long as the president would like me to do so, or for as long as it is useful. But starting next month, I'll be allocating far more of my time to Tesla. And now that the major work of establishing Doge is done. And of course, the government work that he was doing led to a backlash against Tesla, throttling share prices, making Elon a very unpopular person. But the stock has bounced back fairly quickly after these announcements were made.
You know, for this, I think it's a fad. The popular fad is to put bumper stickers on your car that say, I bought this before I knew about Elon, or stuff like that.
You're going crazy or something like that.
But most people won't even remember that Elon was part of our government within a couple of years if Elon follows through with what he is.
Mm-hmm.
Because Tesla will be back and he'll be more behind the scenes. On YouTube, Randolph Schnack has asked, is BYD also getting into building commercial large batteries for the grid? I assume like he's saying with Tesla. Yes, they are. I just looked that up while you were going through that. In Saudi Arabia, there's a 12.5 gigawatt hour project that BYD signed a contract with the government in early 2025. In Chile, the Oasis, the Atacama project, BYD is supplying 6,240 MC cube T units, basically 3.5 gigawatts of storage capacity for Grenergy's Alena plant in Chile. And in the United States, right in our backyard, the Reed Gardner BESS, it's in Nevada. BYD has provided 208 LFP battery enclosures for a 440 megawatt hour battery system.
Okay.
So they are starting to get into the stationary power applications that Tesla's into as well.
Mm-hmm. I don't think it's much of a mystery to watch the success of Tesla and to just plagiarize and emulate.
Yeah.
It seems to be working. YouTube Ghost Privacy says, like we say in crypto, don't just trust but verify.
Absolutely.
They say that in crypto. You know,
Yes, it's always trust but don't trust but verify is the mantra.
I don't know whether our audience realizes this, but Mark is actually one of the early crypto individuals. Are you still mining?
I am still mining. I've been mining since 2018.
Instagram, one Angus says, over here in Europe, Teslas are smashing it with superchargers. Very cool. I have a graph here to pop up, and this one shows the cumulative Teslas on the road worldwide. And again, if you look at the years 2008 through about 2014, it was, fairly flat line, but then it starts to take off. And currently, I was surprised, there are over 7 million Teslas on the road worldwide currently.
Isn't that something? Take it and draw a vertical line in the little gap that's above 2017.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we do this podcast partly. To the left of that line is the market that we've been addressing that has grown Gruber Motors to date.
Mm-hmm.
To the right of that line is what our market's going to become in the next 8 years.
Right. You can, and if you extrapolate that out, you begin to see that the original intent was to move the world away from fossil fuel burning type, transportation. And that goal has been well achieved, and it's well underway.
Remind me again. Tesla's corporate mission is stated on their factory in Fremont on a big plaque.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that mission again?
It is to foster the transition to sustainable energy.
Okay, which means that Tesla is going to think of themselves possibly less as in competition with BYD as they are in partnership with BYD.
I already hear that from Tesla, because we're in communication with Tesla all the time. And I'll tell an interesting story here. One of the service center managers, we were talking about the industry, the difficulty in finding technicians, mechanics, whatever we call them now and all that. And I said, is it troubling to you that these other EV upstarts are poaching our people? Because they realize there's such a shortage of staff available that have these skills. Right. You can't go down to a dealership and poach their mechanics because they have no idea how to work on electric vehicles.
Right.
She said something very interesting to me. She says, no, I don't find that troubling at all because it supports the overall mission here at Tesla.
There we go. Yeah.
All right. So BMW, we should probably talk about that. And I do have an image here. And this is a picture of the BMW boss who says he calls EV-only strategy a dead end. Now, he's not saying EVs are a dead end. He's saying a only EV strategy is a dead end. So, Mark, you looked into this, and this is Oliver Zipse, by the way. What are your thoughts on his comments?
Yeah, Oliver Zipse made the statement that that companies that went all in on EVs are now having to backtrack on their strategy, and he's like, well, of course, because anybody who wants to go all in on EVs right now is it's a dead end. They're not going to work. And he talked about the example that he gave was, take a look, for example, at Belgium. Nearly 60% of the country in Belgium is electrified. Now take, for example, Italy. Only 4% of Italy is electrified. You can't survive as a car company with those kind of market dynamics. Overall, I disagree with his statements, because I feel like he's using an example like that and making a generalization based on just a few examples. But in short term, he makes some really good points. Globally, there are many areas of the globe that still lack any kind of electrical infrastructure or access to electricity, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and in South and Southeast Asia. There is no electric grid for cars to be able to charge. That means, and that's roughly a little over 10% of the world's population still doesn't even have access to electricity. They're not going to want electric cars if they don't have electricity available.
Yeah.
Similar to that, in rural areas and in colder areas, there's a much slower level of adoption because electric vehicles don't perform as well in colder areas yet. And in rural areas, the infrastructure just isn't there yet to be able to really support the electrification efforts. There's consolidated control over rare earth elements as well. Think about the cobalt and to a lesser extent the lithium, but then the nickel as well. China, we've talked about in the past, China owns about 80% of the world's cobalt mines, and they process over 95% of the world's cobalt ore. They control that element. And right now, battery technology is lithium ion, which uses cobalt and nickel as its cathode and anode. It's a significant part of that battery technology. Without changes in that technology, you've got a new OPEC, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be China and the Republic of Congo that are the two members. That's nothing anyone really wants.
Mm-hmm.
Two authoritarian regimes controlling the world's supply of energy for cars. There are many customers who still prefer ICE, the combustion engines. Whether it's simply people who are uncomfortable with the idea of electric vehicles, people who are older and don't care to wait for what's happening and being built, or a lot of people in rural areas, what they see is they think of it still almost as a fad in a lot of cases. For those that do like electric vehicles but like to have the fallback,
Mm-hmm.
Plug-in hybrid EVs their popularity is absolutely soaring right now. People love plug-in hybrid EVs. Over the weekend, Toyota announced that its most popular vehicle, the RAV4, which in 2024 was the single most popular model in the United States, overtaking the Ford F-150 for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It's only going to be available as either a standard hybrid or a plug-in hybrid going forward. So the hybrid thing is a huge thing. And finally, the economics of maintaining and manufacturing EVs. This is kind of the unspoken elephant in the room. The economics are incredibly massive. When you have a car that has a couple of hundred parts, it takes a lot less effort to manufacture them. It takes a lot less effort to maintain them. You're going to lose hundreds of thousands or millions of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to manage that transition? Very few people have ever talked about that. Within the next 20 years, there'll be all kinds of conversations about that. And that's where I'm thinking it's going to go, is that the things that need to really occur for the EVs to finish picking up is I think EVs need to cost less than ICE vehicles. I think that the battery tech needs to continue to improve. It's already improving greatly. The LFP batteries are a great example of that. Solid state batteries, I think, are just around the corner. The lithium ion, the whole thing that we would be beholden to China on, I think is a short-term technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's going to be a new generation of drivers that comes up who are completely comfortable with the idea of an electrified car and decide economically and simplistically, based on simplicity, that it's just easier to own an EV than it is to own an ICE vehicle. Those are the things that need to happen. And I honestly think it could be 10 to 20 years before those things happen. So while BMW's take might be good short term, I think he's wrong long term.
Mm-hmm. But short term will give him some credibility then.
I think it'll give him some credibility. And I also think that BMW over the next 5 years will probably adjust their strategy. The one thing that he did say that I just can't stomach. I just don't understand. He still thinks hydrogen's going to be a thing.
Yeah, and Toyota along with him.
Yeah, and Toyota along with him. So I just don't see it.
So our thumbnail actually talks about a car made in the U.S. With the current tariff situation would end up being just under $500,000. Before we get there, though, we've got a bunch of comments here.
Yes.
YouTube, PYG CalB says, any word on purchasers for Nikola, the hydrogen biz? Yes, Lucid spent $30 million. And over the weekend, I spoke to someone that works there, and it looks like they are assimilating the assets. They will not be building any, hydrogen cars. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely a lot of useful infrastructure there. It's still unclear what they're going to do with the facility, whether Lucid is going to operate that as an additional facility here locally. But it was quite a bargain, actually. It was reminiscent of the NUMMI purchase by Tesla for $50 million in Fremont, California, many years ago.
But the hydrogen assets themselves, they're not moving forward with hydrogen. I did some looking, and there's nothing else on the hydrogen-only stuff.
Right. YouTube Ghost Privacy says, nice. I mined Bitcoin briefly in 2011 and ETH and BTC from 2018 to about 2023, or whenever ETH stopped proof of work.
Yeah, Ethereum was a great thing to be able to mine. I did a little bit of that. I started in 2018 on Bitcoin. And I still wish I had been mining Bitcoin back in 2011 and 2012 and had just kind of kept it, because my nest egg would be complete at that point if that were the case.
Yes. Randolph asks, are you, Gruber Motors, planning on franchising other outlets to take care of Teslas after they are out of warranties? The simple answer there is it's in the plan somewhere. But the difficulty is finding staff that can work on these cars.
Yeah.
And if that wasn't an issue, yes, we would be scaling today. But we are very methodically growing our capabilities and our staff.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say for the Bitcoin thing, I just looked it up because I was wondering for that guy that did the pizza way back in the day. I don't know if you heard about that, but back in 2010.
Yeah.
It took 1 second to mine 1 Bitcoin. In 2011, it took 20 minutes to mine a Bitcoin. 2012, it took 2 hours. 2013, it took 13 hours. It goes on and on and on. But back in 2010, you could have gotten a Bitcoin basically every time you clicked.
Wow.
And
hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins.
Yeah, you could have.
Oh, yes.
You could have. It said that there were. Right here in 2009, there were only a couple hundred people mining Bitcoin, yet there were 2.5 million Bitcoins mined as rewards. So all of those initial 100, 200 people would have been billionaires today.
But they spent it all on pizza.
Well, you have the guy that spent 1,000 Bitcoins on a pizza.
Yeah.
You have the guy that threw away his laptop and sued the city to go have the right to dig through the dump to try to find the laptop because his Bitcoin wallet was on the laptop.
I think it was a USB stick, wasn't it? Or was it a laptop?
It was a laptop hard drive. And
I heard about that one.
he lost that suit. At the time, he figured that he had $750 million locked up on that laptop hard drive in the dump.
Yeah.
And that and if you take, maybe you guys can do the math for me real quick. $106,000 times 1,000. That's like what is that? A little over a.
I think they're going to do the math over there. We can't do it in our heads anymore.
Say it again. What is it?
106,000 times 1,000.
Yeah, it's 106 million.
Okay, that's how much money that pizza cost.
Yeah.
Bitcoin's about 106,000 per coin right now.
Do you know what's fascinating to me is we attach value to certain things, and of course there's the Lost Dutchman mine here in Arizona, where there's some gold in the dirt somewhere. Nowadays it's no longer gold; It's going to be a thumb drive that has some Bitcoin on it.
Oh, yeah.
It could be mine. Is this the next lost Dutchman mine or the lost Bitcoin?
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
YouTube goes privacy. EV only is a dead end, is probably why China is doing the EV with generators for more mileage, etc. Possibly,
Yeah, possibly.
All right. So getting back now to this notion that a car that was built in the U.S. would be a $500,000, $400,000 car. And I've got that image here, by the way, guys. What you see there is a ho-hum car and, you know, $400K. Well, the Trump administration, of course, would love to make more vehicles in the U.S. of A. And they've been beating that drum for quite some time. We currently, they say, import about 8 million vehicles a year, making up half of the 16 million annual U.S. Sales for cars and light trucks. Tariffs, broadly speaking, can also have an impact on the supply chain. It's been noted that many car companies cross the U.S., Canada, and U.S., Mexico borders numerous times before ending up as a finished vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
This would be subassemblies being sent out, built, coming back, you know, and then eventually going into a vehicle, crossing borders many times. So they say, what would happen if the administration's nirvana of 100% U.S.-made vehicle came to pass? Is it even possible? Well, the prognosis is it's effectively impossible to build a car entirely within U.S. borders. We are in a global economy. We do manufacturing here.
Mm-hmm.
We have made in U.S. product, but the raw materials oftentimes aren't made in U.S. It's not cost effective, for example, to make wall plates in the United States anymore.
Right.
And then the connectors. Well, you have a fiber connector, let's say. It could be that the ferrule is sourced from India, and then the metal housing might be from Canada. So you have all of these parts that go into what's called a bill of materials, a BOM.
Mm-hmm.
Can you have 100% U.S. made in your BOM?
You know, even here in the States, that can be difficult. We do have some of our products that have wholly sourced United States parts. The customers for that, though, because of the expense, are typically customers that demand made in the USA. And I mean, we're talking about 2 connectors, 2 boots, and a copper cable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 7-item BOM. You have those things, and then you have labor, and you have maybe some labels. And yes, we can source it all in the United States, but that cable, and if you look at our competitors on Amazon, we're still one of the cheapest ones out there with a $15 10-foot cable.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will go buy the $3 Chinese 10-foot cable.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark, real quick question on that. For our company, isn't it true that most of that is the government that wants that? Like if we have government contracts, that's where most of that requiring the USA comes in. Are there a lot of just normal businesses that require made in the USA?
Yeah, I was going to say it would be the government, definitely, but then it's also the defense contractors or the government contractors, where the government mandates that they also need to comply with that. But then you get really granular. Okay, take, for example, the wire, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Copper, all right, well, that could be sourced in the U.S. In fact, Arizona has a lot of copper mines.
Yeah, yeah.
But what about the PVC jacket? What about the number of chemicals that go to make that PVC jacket? Now we're getting really granular. That could be sourced from a variety of different places. Does that now make it no longer eligible for made in USA? It gets really murky. It gets really confusing.
And that's a really good question. And I cannot say with 100% certainty. We'd have to go back to our manufacturer,
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things about this made in the USA stuff, because our defense contractors and our the people who work with the government and the government themselves are typically the ones that buy the made in the USA cables. Huge market. But at the same time, they do typically want us to trace back the origin of all this stuff, and we have to go to our supplier, and they go to their supplier, and on up the chain. And it's a lot of times made in the USA does not mean that the raw materials, the chemicals used to make polyvinyl chloride, for example, are actually constructed in the USA. They're just not constructed in one of those few countries that we don't want to do business with.
Sure. So in this article, they give an analogy, and they say, if you've ever toured an assembly line, a production line, inside the plants, you'll see some great big robots and lots of high-tech computer screens and entire engines being lowered into unfinished chassis. But you'll also see numerous bins filled with screws, nuts, bolts, clips, all manner of fiddly little components that you know hold the car together. These bits are not made in America because it would be unbelievably costly to pay for American-made bits. So again, we get back to the bill of materials. And then, of course, you have the engineering costs that are also huge. Well, the bill of materials, they say, cannot be avoided. That's what makes up or comprises your parts or your products. So the rest of the article basically says, apart from Elon Musk, who doesn't seem to be offering his extensive grasp of this topic to any of the Trump advisors. You know, Elon definitely is in production hell many times. I remember him complaining about the Model 3 production hell. So he's very familiar with bill of materials and the production process. But they say nobody in the Trump administration seems to know anything about 21st century manufacturing. And, of course, they have designed and rolled out the most ambitious disruption to the global manufacturing economy in human history. Well, the end goal is simply unachievable, the article says, because GM and Ford have already clearly flashed a warning that on that front, and they predict a combined $6.5 billion hit to their profits for 2025. Ford's annual profit could be knocked down by 25%. And, of course, GM isn't far behind. So the embedded economics of the auto industry are merciless. If you don't make money, you borrow money to cover the gap, but if you don't start making money at some point, the debt kills you fast.
Yep.
So again, the article here points out the alarming thing is that nobody in the administration seems to have figured this out. All right, we've got a bunch of people chiming again. Ghost privacy from YouTube. We also need more forms on the onboard generation for EVs, like solar panels, etc. I have some ideas for inline wind turbine energy harvesting on EVs too.
That's very interesting. I'd love to hear more of those ideas. You know, it's almost like with our little golf cart. Have a solar panel roof, and it certainly helps.
It does. We've got Mike Aldea joining us. He's an ex-Tesla battery expert on the Roadster from YouTube. He says, how about instead of finding people, how about creating a training center to work on Teslas? It's a great idea, Michael. The unfortunate part for companies like us is we're a for-profit organization, and this sounds like a, an investment. And do we have enough time to finally see the outcome of this? Now, what I'd really like to see is that the community colleges, the universities, and the private learning institutions begin to recognize that there's an opportunity here.
Well, one quick example. In Maricopa County here in Arizona, at the high school level, there is a group of schools called WestMech, Western Maricopa Education Center, and it's a technology school. Kids that choose to go there spend half their time doing regular high school and half their time doing whatever trade. I know that up here in the north end of town, by where we're located in Gruber Motors, there is a WestMech campus, and it includes, at the high school level, EV technician training at the very basic level. I also know that they have reached out to us, and while I don't know that we have official collaboration going on, I know that we've been in contact with them as well.
We have been, yes. And in fact, what we were doing was acting in an advisory capacity, reviewing their curriculum to see how relevant it is. And First Pass, this was about 3 years ago, so I'm sure it's improved. It was strictly fossil fuel type technology that they were somehow attempting to redirect into EVs, but it didn't look great.
Yeah.
And it was literally reams of books about this high that they were asking us to look through. It looks like we are coming to the end of our podcast. We usually keep these to half an hour, but we're pushing an hour, and our social media team seems to be okay with it at this point.
I know. I'm surprised that we haven't had the announcement yet. But yes.
Yes, so we are not going to have a Roadster podcast today at 11 o'clock. But be sure to join our other podcast. Thursday, it's the COM podcast at 2:30 in the afternoon. And then Friday morning at 10, no, they're at 10:30 now, come to think of it.
10:30 now?
Yeah, Claude changed it.
Okay.
That is the Gruber Power Podcast. Next week, we will most likely do the Roadster podcast along with this EV podcast. We've got some topics that are beginning to collect and brew. Again, I'm Pete Gruber. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Mark Schaffner. Have a great day.